好，那接下来这一场呢是由Dennis Gizeh 跟 Braylon 带来的，就是Reverse Engineering and Hacking Ecovacs Robots: The Bad and the Really Bad。那其实这场就是在讲，就是说现在市售的很多就是吸尘器、洗地机器人这种，他们都有很多的硬体方面其实有很大的漏洞。那就是它是让我们知道说现在的这个硬体这类型的硬体有哪些问题，哪些常见的问题这样子。好，那我们就掌声欢迎他。
All right. Thank you very much for being here. I'm sorry if I'm speaking too fast, but I hope the translators are doing a good job, so if you don't understand English. Yeah, so welcome to our talk about reverse engineering and hacking Ecovacs robots, the bad and the really bad. Before we start, I would like to introduce ourselves. First, I'm Dennis. I'm a security researcher, also a kind of hardware hacker. And my research field are basically wireless and embedded systems, and I look especially for security and privacy. I try to reverse engineer all kind of interesting devices, so whatever is like kind of attaches my attention, like smart locks, you know, I take a look at them. I call myself also like a vacuum robot and IoT collector, so I think by now we probably have like something like 70 vacuum robots and over 600 IoT devices. And my main goal is basically, hey, I want to root vacuum robots. And one thing which I kind of also do is like I have a website where I try to document like what kind of hardware devices have, what kind of software they have, what kind of methods exist to root them. So it's robotinfo.dev. It's sometimes up to date. It kind of a little bit depends. All right, and now to Braylon.
Hi, I'm Braylon. I hack things for Leviathan Security Group as my day job, but I'm here representing myself as an independent security researcher. My general focus over the years has been application security and APIs, but I started robot and hardware hacking during COVID, during the quarantine, and yeah, started taking things apart for fun. I had a broken robot, took it apart. Now I've been looking at like cameras, smart locks, and a little bit of everything.
Okay, so let's talk about the goal of this talk. So one thing which is kind of important to me is I want you to understand security and privacy risks of IoT devices generally. I want to give you some idea about how we started vacuum robot hacking and how it processes over the last couple of years. Then we want to tell you about some vulnerabilities which we found and how you can potentially find them too. And the ultimate goal which we try to do is like we want to get some kind of root access without disassembling the device, right? So through some external methods without breaking warranty seals. Some past research which we did for vacuum robots was basically, we started in 2017, and it's a topic which is so niche that it keeps giving a talk. So there's always a lot of development, in the market. There's more and more devices, and on a regular basis, you can just give a talk basically every year, every 2 years. So if you ever plan to, give talks, find a topic which is niche enough and interesting enough and impactful enough, and you can be on, people will be interested and you can present it on a regular basis. And we started with Xiaomi, and but we basically went through all the vendors. Okay, some disclaimers. So we don't claim that vendors are using the sensors and the devices to spy on you, but in theory they could. They also primarily cover physical attacks and proximity attacks, so basically attacks up to 150 meters. And many vendors have this problem, so it's not just the vendors which we talk about, but there's a lot of other vendors which are also broken. It's independent of origin, size, or market share, but in this talk we kind of focus on Ecovacs. And one important thing is this is our private research, so it's not funded by any company, it's just our private money, basically. So, what kind of devices are we talking about in this talk? And these are basically all the Ecovacs devices which were manufactured after 2018 until today, basically. Some of them have cameras, and mostly we focus on devices which run Linux. Right. So about this talk. So this talk is basically the result of like more or less 6 years research of experiments, experiments. We're technically not the first ones or the only ones who look at Ecovacs robots. And one thing which we found is that while the vendor knows about all our findings because we told them in advance, they sometimes try to fix them, but they fail by just not understanding what the vulnerability is. And for the worst vulnerabilities, they seem to just ignore it until recently, until basically the press kind of pressed them for that. I want to give a special shout out to Chris Anderson, who found a lot of things independently of us. So we kind of noticed as soon as we started to give talks about the topic, he was like, hey, I found this thing, and we kind of basically trading vulnerabilities, and we noticed like, hey, we found exactly the same things. So one of the important questions is like, if we found it, who else did find it, and what they do with that? Generally, that kind of research is a collaborative effort. So typically, if we are at hacker conferences, we just sit together, hack some stuff. As you can see on the left side, we were like in Goa at NullCon, and we were hacking robots. And on a hacker camp in Germany, basically, we had the lawn mowing robots. We were hacking stuff too. So it's a cool thing, cool project to do with multiple people. So if you ever have like a cool project, just try to find friends and just hack stuff. Okay. So let's talk about the motivation. Why do we want to root devices in the first place? One thing for me as a hardware hacker, well, we want to play with cool hardware. The other thing, as a German, we are very paranoid about everything, no matter if it comes from China or US. So we want to prevent devices from constantly phoning home. The other thing is a lot of people are kind of tinkerers, so they want to have some kind of smart home solution. For example, like Home Assistant, FIAM, there's a couple ones out there. Which would require rooting devices. And one thing which becomes more and more important is like the diagnosis of broken devices. These devices break potentially after 1 or 2 years, 1 month after they're out of warranty, and you basically kind of screwed. So we try to figure out what's going on there. And the other thing is, the vendors say that privacy is important for them, but the question is we want to obviously verify the privacy claims. So why don't we trust IoT devices? Why don't we trust the vendors? Well, the problem with IoT devices generally is they are connected to your home network. They have typically a communication to the cloud which is encrypted, and you have no idea what they're communicating. And from our own experience, we know that the development of secure hardware and software is extremely hard. And in the past, we also caught a lot of vendors with very shady behaviors. One thing which makes it a little bit more complicated is even that these devices, they don't only get cameras, but they have nowadays also microphones. And the question is like, this becomes like a little bit more interesting for people who kind of want to know what's happening in your home. So when we talk about devices with cameras, there's a couple of risks associated to that. For once, devices might store pictures indefinitely, and we figured out that many do both locally and in the cloud. And if you buy a used device, this might be problematic. For example, if you buy a used device like from Amazon Warehouse or whatever the equivalent here in Taiwan is, whoever owned it before might have installed a rootkit without your knowledge. So you as a new owner, you have no way to verify that the software is still fine. And as a result, you might have a malicious device in your network. So root access is basically the only way to kind of know that the device is hopefully clean. Another thing, this was like a project which I was involved with, where iRobot was caught how they were basically taking pictures of people in the US, and they were sending them off to Venezuela for people to label them for machine learning. And there were people sitting in a bathroom, and all these pictures were basically labeled. And the other thing is that Amazon wanted to buy iRobot in particular, not because of their vacuum robots, but because they have a lot of data about your house design, how the maps are kind of in your home. So it's very, very problematic what kind of devices, what kind of data is stored on devices. Another important question is like, hey, there's a lot of certifications out there. Can you trust them? And all the devices which we so far analyzed over the last couple of years were certified by TÜV, Rhineland, TÜV Süd. We have like ETSI certifications, which are the European certifications. We're certified after ISO 27000. So there's a lot of certifications out there, and we want to answer the question if you can rely on that. Okay. So let's talk about our robot hacking journey. The first work was basically done in 2017. And this was presented at CCC and at DEFCON. Basically, this was a work together, me and Dani Wegemer, and we were looking at Xiaomi vacuum robots and Roborock robots. We figured out the OTA was broken, so the over-the-air updates, and you could just push local updates, so we were able to kind of get root access. Then later on, we kind of fixed that, so we had to find new ways, and for the newer Roborock models, we had to basically build a custom bootloader tool, but it required teardown, so this kind of was a problem. Even back, we kind of looked already at Ecovacs, and after the CCC talk, someone gave us a free robot which you got from Ecovacs as an influencer. And the cool thing with that was it was a very early device which had the bug symbol, so we kind of were able to reverse engineer the firmware and kind of knew what they started to do. One of the things which we found back then even was that the firmware is completely unprotected, the TLS is completely broken, we had no integrity protections, and you can just basically root it with man in the middle by using malicious OTA updates. One of the problems here was that the hardware was extremely weak. So we really were not interested in like rooting the devices. So we never published actually on that, and the project was abandoned. So for the other devices, we had to develop new methods. So at DEFCON 29, we presented ways to root newer Roborock and Dreame robots. We found basically a secure boot bypass, and we were able to bypass security features. They fixed it, so we had to find new ways, so it's always like a cat and mouse game. At DEFCON 31, basically last year, we found a secure boot bypass through some bootloader magic for Dreame, Roborock, Narwhal, and Shark robots. And as you see, I mean, it's always like a cat and mouse game, and it gets very annoying. And so the thing is, what we were thinking, okay, this is like, it costs a lot of time to find new 0 days or like new vulnerabilities in devices. What about if you look at other vendors, maybe we're more lucky and we can get 2 more years out of robots. So we started to look for a new vendor. We went back to Ecovacs, and we noticed that Ecovacs nowadays release more and more powerful models. So the features are very, very similar to the competition, but the price is very low. So it was kind of cool. And one of the first devices which we analyzed was an X1. So we just bought it on Amazon, and it took exactly 30 minutes to get root access to that. We got a modified file system. And we noticed like, hey, okay, this might be a cool target for like potential rooting efforts. And independently, while I was doing that, Braden also hacked Ecovacs robots and Yeti robots, which are a sub-brand of Ecovacs. And basically many people looked at that. One general thing which we noticed is that some vendors kind of knew about our talks, so they started to obfuscate things and obfuscate like the bug ports and other things. So they upgraded their security, we upgraded our de-security thing. So we basically started to build like X-ray machines and started to X-ray devices, which is like a little bit faster than figuring out where the bug ports are by just looking through the PCB. Okay, so let's talk about the Ecovacs ecosystem. So why did we take a look at Ecovacs in particular? Well, this company is actually quite old, I mean, compared to other companies. So it was founded in 1998, and originally they were OEM for vacuum cleaners. And they introduced their first vacuum robot in 2007. And in 2020, we had a market share of like 70%, when we were second to iRobot. But I think currently they were probably the market leaders after iRobot took like a nosedive. For example, their market cap is like 5 times higher than iRobot, so they might be the market leaders right now. And they produce a lot of different products. So they have like obviously vacuum robots, but they have also robots which kind of clean your windows. So you just attach it to your window and it cleans it. They have mobile air purifiers and humidifiers which drive around in your home. And they have also lawn mowing robots to kind of mow your lawn. So there's a lot of stuff out there. So when we talk about robots, we kind of need to figure out like, what's going on there. So we need to take a look at hardware. So typically, if we take a look at hardware boards of vacuum robots, we have two basic components. On one side, we have the SoC, which is basically responsible for like navigation, mapping, connectivity. So it runs the Linux operating system. It has like storage connected to it, LiDAR, cameras, microphones. It has some connectivity like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or ultra wideband. And it has the bug interfaces. On the other side, we have MCUs, which are responsible for all the real-time stuff, like controlling motors, controlling actors, wheels, and other things. There's like multiple chips in there. If you take a look at the very old devices, then one thing which you figure out is it has like a very, very low chip, like the Rock chip, which has 1 ARM core and 128 megabit of RAM and 256 megabyte of NAND flash. While it had LiDAR and infrared sensors, it was just too weak, and it was not really interesting for hacking. Because even if you get root access, you cannot run anything because it's just bare bone, the minimum or what it needs to kind of just do a job of cleaning your apartment. So you have no resources for like doing anything cool with it. Later on, we took a look at like the newer devices, and they were interesting and cheap. And the cool thing for us as hardware hackers, the newer generations of robots have very similar hardware throughout generations, which is important for you. Typically, if they always repeat the same hardware, then you don't need to learn like everything new again. For new generations, you can just reuse your knowledge. And as an example, we have the X1, which came out, I think, 2 years ago. And it had some cool features. For example, you could control it from the station. You had the voice assistant, so it had microphones, and you were able to do a remote view, so you could access the cameras remotely. So this becomes a very, very interesting target for us. If you take a look at the hardware closer, Sorry. One thing which we noticed is but it's basically the same hardware, even like for newer generations. So it's based on the Horizon X3 SoC. So it's a quad-core ARM SoC, which has like an additional Cortex R5 core, and it has an AI accelerator on it. So these devices have AI accelerators already in them. They have 2 GB of RAM typically. 512 megabyte of NAND flash. The X1, the X2 has 4 gigabyte of eMMC, and we have some GD32 MCUs, like many of them. GD32 is, I think, the cheap China variant of the STM32. People say it's kind of copied, but who am I to judge? One interesting chip which we found in there is a special chip from Baidu, which is used for AI or voice processing. So it has its own firmware on SPI flash. It apparently is used for wake word detection, but I couldn't find really a lot of documentation about that. So that was kind of interesting for us. Sensor-wise, obviously we have LiDARs, so laser tower which kind of rotates. We have a microphone array between 3 and 6 microphones, depending on which model you have. We have multiple cameras and line lasers, so they kind of for detecting objects in front of them. And we have obviously lots of infrared distance sensors. But what we do typically is we take one vacuum robot, which we use as a base, and then we derive other devices from that. So from this device derived, what we have is the airbot, or we call it also spybot, which is an air purifier. It was released in 2023. It's basically the same hardware as the vacuum robots, but they added more cameras to it, and they added 6 microphones. And the features are that basically you can run it as a Bluetooth speaker, which drives around in your home and follows you, as an air filter and air humidifier, and home patrol, which is an interesting feature. So it will drive around in your home and will detect intruders. And you can also use it to talk to people in your home, which was kind of interesting. Actually, this device is a bargain because basically you get two robots in one. We were recycling hardware, and basically what we did is we took the vacuum robot hardware from the X1, put it on top. We took like an old hardware from the 900 series, put it on the bottom, and run an Ethernet cable between both of them in this device to kind of communicate with each other. So, you get 2 robots basically for the price of one. If you take a look at the lawn mowing robots, they came out also last year in Europe, in Australia, and I think also in Asia, and this year in the US. They're kind of cool. They have GPS, we have time-of-flight cameras, we have visual cameras like a 360 camera and ultra-wideband beacons. And feature-wise, again, you can add LTE to them optionally, but you can also run it as a patrol mode, so it will patrol your garden and alarm you from intruders. Now people might get paranoid, hey, if it can do patrol mode, what about security? And here they say oh, don't worry, we are certified, and everything which is captured in your home and garden is all encrypted, so don't worry, we are certified. If you ever run into the joy of disassembling this device, make sure that you keep track of your screws. When I disassembled that, it took a couple hours to disassemble it, and when I reassembled it, I was 2 screws missing, and I still don't know where they are. So there might be places where there's 2 more screws where there shouldn't be any screws, and well, they might just disappear. So keep track of your stuff. Hardware-wise, this device is kind of cool. It's actually octa-core with an AI accelerator. 4 gigabyte of RAM and 16 gigabyte of eMMC flash. So this is basically a Raspberry Pi or a smartphone running on wheels in your garden with knives and cameras. And again, we put a lot of MCUs into it, for the display, for the knife assembly. So even the rotating knife assembly has its own microcontroller. Sensor-wise, 360-degree camera. So on top, you have front cameras, you have time-of-flight sensors. These are the sensors which create the point cloud. You have rain detector sensors. You have bump switches. So there's a lot of stuff. The cool thing for us is they added a lot of debug ports. Or they standardized debug ports more or less. So if you have an Ecovacs since 2019, more or less the debug port will look exactly the same. And the debug port will give you access to UART, 3.3 volt, SWD, and USB from outside. And it's very easy to debug and root the device without breaking any warranty seals, which is a good thing on one side, which might be a bad thing if you talk about security and privacy of used devices. All right, in the next part, we talk about software.
Cool. Yeah, let's have a brief overview of what kind of software these robots rely on. So these are basically Linux servers. They are running Linux OS. They also use ROS Melodica Marinium. So if you're interested in learning robotics programming, these are kind of a cool device to take apart and reverse engineer. There's also a custom software suite called Medusa. This is Ecovacs' thing. There's also some interesting software packages that are included on the device, including a full Python 2.7 environment, which is very useful when you're hacking things. These also use AWS Kinesis SDK for remote camera access outside of a PRC, and the Alibaba Aliyun SDK for camera access inside of PRC. So there's also no protections against rooting the device. So these robots come with AI models. Like, we took a quick look at them. They're using TensorFlow and OpenCV for detection. They're typical objects like furniture, cables, pets, and pet remains, one of our favorite finds. So the lawnmower can also do face recon and identify small animals. So for firmware updates, they kind of drop device support pretty quickly, we've found. Their flagship DBot X2 received a firmware update in March 2024. So is this device end of life? It's quite new. So their changelogs are also not very informative. Just, we are optimizing for user experience and no other details. So let's talk about the mobile apps. There's the actual app is called Ecovacs Home, and in order to use robots, you need to download specific plugins to have the functionality. These are Vue.js, just kind of downloaded dynamically, just standard plugins. So let's go over the kind of security and privacy findings for Ecovacs. So they don't really have a real collaborative bug bounty program. They just kind of have a static web page with no interactive components. Just, hey, email us if you find something and maybe we'll get back to you, but probably not. They also have allegedly a public bulletin board, which we have been unable to find. And so they did not reply to our reports until recently, which we will discuss later. And this has been the same experience for other researchers. And some bugs are silently patched, so we think they might be reading the emails, but who knows? So yeah, as for their privacy policy, they don't have any guarantees that your data stays in the user locale. And generally, AWS services are used for your specified region. There's also photos and videos that are sent to the Ali Cloud Video for AI analysis in certain models, even if you don't opt into it. So that can be a little scary. And there's obviously a lot of telemetry data collected. That's kind of standard for IoT devices, but yeah, everybody's doing it. So privacy concerns. So these vacuums are obviously equipped with cameras and microphones, but so we need to ask, can these be enabled remotely without user notice, and where is the actual data being sent? And as for AI, we need to ask, why do robots need face recon and AI models, and is telemetry data being used to train their AI? Yeah, so after Dennis's DEFCON 31 talk, Ecovacs posted this kind of interesting blog post titled, "Can Robot Vacuums Be Hacked?" They seemed a little bit scared that maybe they were going to be next, but just an interesting finding. So Ecovacs boasts like multiple certifications from TÜV Rheinland, and they claim to meet all these like standards, these strict standards, and are they meeting it? Who knows? So let's go over a few of our findings. First, we want to talk about like data harvesting. So these mobile apps and robots they're really chatty. There's a lot of traffic going back and forth between the servers and the devices. But the key data collection API points are named big data and data upload, so they're not exactly trying to hide what they're doing. Some examples of telemetry data being collected are the live coordinates of your robot's location in the home. For example, if the robot gets stuck, a bunch of like debug information is sent to the server. And there's also Wi-Fi access points and network data being collected, and possibly AI pictures, even if you're not opted in, but we need to do further research on that. So what kind of data are they keeping in their cloud? So maps and pictures are stored in a NoSQL database. So we also found that anyone who knows the object ID can access this data. So you just need a standard Ecovacs account, and you can access anyone's home map. We don't advise you do this. It's kind of unethical, but we were able to access our own maps. So the maps associated with robots, they seem to remain on the servers. So even if you delete your account, you can still access the map, which is kind of bad. They also survive factory resets and repairing to a different account. And yeah, deleting your account has no effect. They keep the map of your house on their servers. We also found that the JWT token used to communicate with their API, it remains valid after you delete your account. So you can still use that JWT for up to a week, which is kind of bad. So they're not actually deleting your accounts, it seems. And you can still access the robots. So what kind of data are they storing on the devices? So the user data partition isn't encrypted on the device. There's lots of logs, configs, and maps, and pictures, and everything stored on that partition. There's also the live video pin. So in order to access the video feed, you can set a pin, and that's stored as an MD5 hash on the device. Same with the robot lawnmower pin. That one's plain text, though. There's also Wi-Fi credentials and the names of your neighbor's Wi-Fi access points. And there's also their voice assistant called the Hello Yiku, traffic logs that are also being collected. And we found that the factory reset does not fully erase all this information, and sensitive log files remain even after you factory reset things. But there's also additional problems with flashware leveling, but that's for a different talk. So one of the kind of bad things we found during our research was that TLS certificates are not being checked correctly. They're misconfigured, but the robot-specific plugins don't always do this. So the main home app does correctly check certificates, but the robot-specific plugins don't. So they accept self-signed certificates, which is really risky if you're using an insecure Wi-Fi network, like at an airport or in a hotel. And there's no warning or error shown in the app when this is happening. And this actually leaks user account authentication tokens. And this allows an attacker full access to your account and devices for possibly up to a week. So here's an example of some of the traffic that we were able to intercept and gain access to our own personal account tokens, JWTs. And yeah, that could be pretty bad. So same goes with the robots. The MQTT and TLS connections accept self-signed certificates on a couple of devices, which allows for man-in-the-middle attacks. And over-the-air updates can also be injected. So we've been using the tool certmidden by Apple Oxman. And again, another example of some of the things that we can intercept and view in plain text. We think one of the issues with this is that they are using wget and they're using no check certificate for this, so not a best practice. Another thing that we noted is that there's an audio warning when the camera is accessed. It plays at the start of access and every 5 minutes afterwards. The sound file is just played notifying you that the camera is on. So the problem is that this is a sound file stored on the data partition, which is unencrypted, so we can tamper with these files, and these sound files can be deleted or replaced. And yeah, you can replace the warning with an empty file, and if you're an attacker with remote access to the robot, you can just kind of watch the camera, follow them around. It's kind of creepy. So one of the big things we found is that you can. So the app allows for live video and or audio access on the robot, and this is functionality provided by AWS Kinesis. So the owner of the account and shared users can access like a live video stream. This can be protected by a PIN, and it will ask for a PIN before connecting, and this can only be changed and reset by the owner of the account. And the reset requires account credentials. So it ideally should be pretty secure. So in an ideal world, the app asks the user for a PIN, and it goes to the cloud, which acts as a broker, and asks the robot, hey, does this pin hash match with the local hash? The robot will say, yes, the pin is correct. So then the video feed starts, just kind of a, everybody's dropped into an AWS Kinesis session, and you can view the video stream. So can we bypass this functionality? Well, when we provide an incorrect pin, it says, no, you cannot access the video feed. So are the pin verification and WebRTC tied together? So can we tamper with the pin is incorrect response and say, hey, the pin is actually correct? And yes, we were actually able to bypass the pin feature entirely and have a malicious WebRTC or AWS Kinesis session that we should not be in. So can we simplify this scenario by patching the pin query out of the app? And yes, we were able to do that. So just to note that this is not a vulnerability in AWS. This is Ecovacs' implementation that is going wrong. So yeah, the pin protection implemented in the app, which is just doing a client-based authentication and ACL enforcement. And the robot does not keep track of successful authentications. And the video of, or the log of video stream access relies on the honesty of the app. And this is really bad in combination with the TLS issue we just talked about, or in shared accounts. This is even worse if the sound files have been tampered with. So here's just a video demonstration of this. We reported this first in 2023. They pushed an unsuccessful fix, and we were still able to bypass this. So here's just a video. We are just like using Burp Suite to find and replace just queries. It's really not a technically complex attack. So here I'm entering the wrong pin, 1111, a couple of times. So now I enable that find and replace in Burp Suite. And we are able to get into the video session with an incorrect pin. And yeah, there's the video feed of my dog, who's not super thrilled to be a part of the demonstration. Cool, so let's talk about the Bluetooth.
All right, so these attacks which we just talked about with the video pin bypass, that's all we can do like through the cloud. If you're here, for example, you're connected to the Wi-Fi and you access your robot at home, then you might be screwed. But we found another thing which is a little bit more problematic in regard to like proximity. So it turns out that new robots, new vacuum robots, and all the lawn mowing robots, they use BLE for provisioning. And for lawn mowing robots in particular, the Bluetooth is always active, while for vacuum robots, it's only active for the first 20 minutes after booting. So I just turned on the robot, so it's now active. And all the robots typically reboot in the night daily because they kind of don't trust their garbage collection in their software, so they kind of just reboot the device to kind of make sure that we don't have a stack overflow or somewhere like a memory leak. The communication between the app and the robot itself is using the GET protocol, which is kind of like a standard thing. The payload is encrypted with a very secret and secure key, which is something similar like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Ecovacs. And the input validation of whatever you send through that protocol is, let's say, not great. The astonishing parts here is that, again, this protocol, this device was like pen tested by like a very reputable German company, TÜV Rheinland, who kind of TÜV, I think it's TÜV Rheinland, who kind of gave him a certification. And the error problem is like, well, this device has microphones and cameras, so that's a huge problem. All right, so how does it work? So first, we have a command which we want to execute. In our example, for example, we want to play the boot music. So what we do with this command, we embed it in a JSON payload, and then from there we generated an encrypted payload. I'm sorry, the animation was a little bit broken. So this is how the encrypted payload would look like. If you want to try it out on your own robot at home, if you go to that link, there's the example payload there. If you send this payload to the robot, what happens, it will basically receive it, decrypt it, check if the decryption worked. It will parse and extract a particular variable. In our example, it's like just foo. Then it will generate a command line where it will add the foo into like a local variable in that command line, and it will look like that, the whole command line, and it will just execute that as root. We tested that up to a distance of 50 meters. Actually, for the lawnmowers, actually works up to 130 meters because we have a more powerful Bluetooth module. And we have a demo here for a lawn mowing robot. So what we do here is we just have the lawn mowing robot next to us. We just use a normal phone. We send a payload to the robot, and in the ideal case, it should just give us a reverse shell. So now we can, check what's going on. So we are root, we are running on a dbot, and if you look at the file date, this is the latest firmware which actually exists for this device. So this was like from April, and that's still like valid basically. Okay, let me do one quick thing. Okay. The same thing we did with the lawnmowing robot outside. So as you can see, this is basically you can stand next to it, but it can be also more far apart. We have the payload already loaded. This would connect a telnet, and it takes a while. And what it would do normally, it plays music, so it executes the payload, and the payload stays active. And the same thing we can do also with the X2, which we have here. But in regard to the time, we will just skip that. We will be outside later. You can get some routing cables if you want. We have all the parts with us, so just find us afterwards. We can demonstrate it there. The cool thing with this attack is you can use it to actually warm things. So one thing we can do is we can send the payload to the first device. If you're living in a big house, we compromise the first device. That device might be closer to a different device, which we don't see as an attacker, so it can send the payload to that. That device, again, is hopefully closer to another device, so you can send the payload to that, and you can, repeat the whole thing all over again. So you can basically create a hardware worm which kind of goes into the world via vacuum robots and lawn mowing robots and air purifiers. All right, let's talk about routing. Interestingly, we had some countermeasures. For example, we obfuscated all the interesting binaries. We used lots of XOR and byte shifting to hide strings. We had a lot of anti-debugging features, like we detected LD preload and P traces and debuggers. And for some of the devices, but not all of them, they actually enabled secure boot, so they kind of protected some of their partitions with DM Verity. To get a root shell, well, that's surprisingly easy. If you have UART access, you can get through the root login at least. The problem is we have root passwords which are different per device, and it's not hard-coded, and the password is set at boot time. And they kind of have hidden the function, obfuscated it, and there's like one particular program which is like doing that, which is echo password. And the way how you compute that is actually you take your serial number, you put it into the string, then there's two random MAC addresses, which I assume were the developer's computer or something. They just wanted to have some random numbers. And you add the model number, you do SHA-256 over that, put it in a space 64, and that's your root password. If you want to calculate yourself, here's like a tool which kind of allows you to generate that. Regarding to firmware updates, turns out the firmwares are encrypted but not signed. And the encryption key is dynamically computed and well hidden. So we use like some kind of AS128 CBC and derive it from like some magic string. And here's the string, so we're just probably typing randomly things on their keyboard. And for whatever reason, they added like an email address of one of the developers into that string, which is used to generate the key. So we're still not sure what's going on there. In regard to persistence, we can, for many devices, we can modify the root file system by just changing it. So only a few models are actually checking integrity, so we can just bypass that. We have a forgotten feature which executes any scripts which are in a data partition under the photo auto start. So you can put your stuff in there and it will just, run. And you can do that also to survive firmware factory resets by making the file immutable. It turns out that we don't actually format the file system, the user data partition. We just delete files instead of formatting the whole partition. All right, and Braylon will now finish up with our takeaway lessons.
Okay, so what did we learn on this journey? So can you trust these like fancy German certifications? That's up to you, but personally from our research, we're not super happy about them. So, okay, another thing we want to talk about is the Ecovacs' response. So after DEFCON this year, we had some media attention on the Ecovacs specific talks, and they responded and said that the attacks are very complex and require specialized hacking tools, which thankfully hackers never have access to. So don't worry, everything is fine. So after they issued that statement, they directly emailed us and acknowledged that the product security team overlooked our reports from December 2023, and they conducted an in-depth verification and self-examination. So here's some of the fixes that they're promising to actually issue. We're running out of time here, but they said they're going to fix everything, but we will see. We will hold them accountable. So yeah, these are all the vulnerable devices, every vacuum and lawnmower right now with Bluetooth. Yeah, if you want to root your devices, don't download new firmware updates. So, but if you want to like not be vulnerable to the Bluetooth problems, maybe do it. It's up to you. So used devices, always be careful with buying used devices. They could be compromised, et cetera, and do a factory reset before selling or disposing. Choose your roommate and partners wisely because they could spy on you using the robots. In summary, we have root for most released Ecovacs robots. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
好，那我们谢谢他这场精彩的演讲啊，这个状况真的比我们想象的糟蛮多了。这2024年竟然还有人不验 TLS certificate。好，那我们开放一个问题啊，if anyone have any questions，oh yeah。
Just a curiosity question. Did you test the Dyson one? Because I got one in my house.
Yeah. So Dyson is very similar, like all the other vendors. They're not as sketchy as Ecovacs in this particular case. So the Bluetooth, to be fair, this where there's the first like the Bluetooth remote code execution which we found for Ecovacs, which was like the highest thing which we found so far in regard to proximity. For Dyson, you can root it, but you need physical access to that. But to be fair, they're very expensive, and you can get cheaper devices which can do more. So it's a boutique product, which we didn't want to take a quick deeper look into it.
OK， 好，谢谢。那两位讲者应该他们待会应该有蛮高几率会在外面的摊位出现。So you two got to move outside, right? So
yeah.
If anyone is interested, you can go visit them or chat with them on all the crazy stuff that's going on with the vacuum robots.
Yeah. Also, the slides are online, so if you want to access the slides, they are on the website. Sorry, we had to skip a lot of things. I tend to talk too much, so that's a problem.
Thank you. So 那我们这场议程就到这边，谢谢大家。